I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the Wonderful and Strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the 13th sycamore to my beautiful vomit.
I'm sorry that you put yourself in this position, Kalil, as I, the Unplugged Professor, prefer to be tree rather than barf. Bark rather than barf, if you will.
I think that so often I give you the negative one, that I decided to take it upon myself as the hero of this podcast, very self-sacrificingly, may I add, very unselfishly, and just decide to give myself the worst one.
No, I'm thankful you're sacrificing yourself. Thank you so much. I enjoy myself continuing to live without, having to worry about things. And it have to be at your expense, so be it.
And I think about it, I am the vomit. I vomit out all these, opinions and vitriol about the return, and they just soak into the earth. And then you know what you do? You with your roots, you soak up my vomit, and you turn it into life. You give it life.
I feel like this is taking life away from me. I think it's taking life away from anyone else who is their own rooted system into this.
Today we're talking about special features number 2, which is Behind the Curtain. This is featured on discs 9 and 10 of the Z-Day collection. Yes, sir?
We've just, covered, 2 separate singular entities of behind-the-scene features. And the collected amount of time of them,
seriously.
eclipse all other special features we've done.
For those not familiar, this is about 8 hours of special scene, behind-the-scenes footage. And it is almost just exclusively footage.
7 hours and 43 minutes. To be exact.
Approximately 8 hours is still correct.
Approximately 8 hours if you do not move from your seat. Your eyes will be glued to the screen, now won't they, Kalil?
And with this kind of material, we always want to preface it that the best part of experiencing it is actually experiencing it. If you want to just dive in, because maybe you are an aspiring filmmaker, or maybe you love David Lynch and you want to see him work, or you just love The Return, you want to kind of get a really in-depth way of seeing it, watching it actually unfold before your eyes, you got to watch it for yourself. That is the only way to really do this. I'm not saying you got to do 8-hour marathon. You can sprinkle it in, every so often you do a little bit here and there, because it is sectioned off by part. It is not kind of mixed together. You can just look at part 8 if you wanted. You could just look at part 17. Whatever one you're most curious about, you can dive in. That is on the Z-Day collection discs 9 and 10.
Yeah, it's less like diving in. This most certainly takes its time. It's more so you kind of dip yourself in and set yourself on a little floaty and go down the lazy river.
How did you enjoy your time on the lazy river, experiencing almost all of this in one sitting, from my understanding?
Slowly. Very slowly. This is one of the cases where obviously it's edited. Obviously it is edited in the respects that you'll get snippets here and there, and it's going to be focused on these individual parts inside Twin Peaks, but it's all a long, slow period of going through David Lynch talking to actors, scenes being executed, and just camaraderie between the David Lynch mainly, as well as the crew. And it is something that is kind of in a weird pile, similar to the last series of special features, because both of these are looking at David Lynch as a director. One just has this narrative and shows darker highlights with David Lynch.
I wouldn't even say a narrative. They have a narrator, but it never really builds to a story per se.
He's looking for the man with elevated hair.
That is true. This does not have a narrator at all. It is just the footage with hardly any editing. There are a couple parts where it'll fast forward up some stairs or something, but that's about the extent of visual changes. It's just the raw footage, which, by the way, looks great. The cameras they're using are as good quality as what's used for The Return.
You're going to get
film camera tech right there.
You're going to get a solid time, if you are interested in filmmaking or David Lynch as a filmmaker, and you will have hours worth of content to go into, to comb through, and enjoy the creative processes throughout this. There's no doubt inside of it. It still is, nonetheless, a lot of time.
Yes.
That usually I would expect from past experiences into behind the scenes moments. Some people add a little bit of music, or some people like do choppy editing in order to be like, these are quick highlights of a certain theme.
This is not the highlight reel.
This is not
this
the
is
highlight.
The reel.
This is every part is presented.
Now, obviously, there's more than just 8 hours it took to make all of the returns. So this was still cut down from reality.
Yes.
But you really do get to linger in these scenes. And I just want, again, keep emphasizing that if that's something that interests you, it's really unprecedented. I don't know any other media that does this.
No.
That has this, like, much you can explore about the making of. It's really rare and really cool, even if it kind of reads a lot to me like an informational text, where if you're reading like a very dry nonfiction piece about something, or you're reading like, I don't know, like a Wikipedia or Encyclopedia Britannica article on something, if you don't love the thing you're reading about, it's probably going to be really boring. But if you love the thing you're reading about or find it interesting, that's really enthralling to find all this new information. I would kind of say it's akin to that. This is informational text. It is not the event, but it is the history of that event. And kind of seeing it for yourself unfold.
It's a time capsule of the time that David Lynch took a bunch of people together and made something.
I also want to highlight, I really like the title for this special feature, which I know is such a random thing to have an opinion about. I look forward to meeting new people and starting the conversation with, so what do you think of the special feature on Disc 9 and 10 of the Twin Peaks Z-Day collection? Because I quite like the title, Behind the Curtain. And I look forward to meeting a lot of friends and, people who are going to really make an impact on my life and want to be my friend because of those things I say.
And you too can be Kalil's friend if you go to Snake Eye Dreams 1 for the Twitter profile, as in one chance to be Kalil's friend, or many chances, I don't know, that's up to Kalil to decide. Or go to the snakeeyedreams@gmail.com and send your application for friendship to Kalil.
I do really like the title, though, because it's called Behind the Curtain, which for me invokes kind of two things simultaneously. One, I'm thinking of the curtain of Twin Peaks. Right?
What?
That there's the red curtain with the chevron. It's a very recurring image. It's also at the Roadhouse. But I'm also thinking at the same time of like a theater curtain, right? You go behind stage, backstage, you're seeing the actors scrambling before the show starts. That in some ways feels very appropriate to what this is, right? But then there's a third layer, because this dude loves Wizard of Oz. So I'm thinking behind the curtain, I'm thinking about pay no attention to the man behind the curtain from Wizard of Oz. Which also feels incredibly apt. David Lynch is the wizard pulling the levers.
And he is the person that is basically the wizard inside of this, the Wizard of Oz.
So I think there's that kind of layer to it, where if you think about, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtains, it's kind of to me the idea that you're supposed to pay attention to the illusion. Pay attention to the magic. Pay attention to the splendor of the show we're going to put on for you, not necessarily the man behind the curtains. And this is kind of just my imagining maybe of what the title means. I'm probably reading into it a lot, but I kind of like that, because normally in The Wizard of Oz, you're not supposed to pay attention to the man because that'll spoil the illusion, and he's kind of a fraud, right? He's a charlatan. He doesn't want people to know the truth that he's not really this powerful wizard. But I think it's kind of a change on that meaning here, where these 8 hours of special features are cool to see, but they're not the thing. They're not the magic. What's really important here is what we make out of this.
I think the biggest thing that I make out of it that I find intriguing, I mentioned a little bit before, but it's the tone of this versus the previous special feature of going behind the scenes,
right,
where we're able to, it seems very joyful in what we see in this behind the scenes, with maybe like David Lynch maybe looking like mildly annoyed from time to time, but for the most part, it just seemed like a blast to be on set.
Right.
Meanwhile, when you go deeper behind the scenes with the previous behind the scenes features, like David Lynch was seen present, very annoyed, very vocal of his annoyance, and the plaster
of Paris. And we're referring to the Impressions that was on disc 8.
Yes.
Just to clarify for anyone who might have skipped the previous episode and jumped onto this one.
It's a weird like dichotomy to be able to look into both of these lenses.
It's what's shown and what's not. And there are some repeat things that if you watch the 5 hours of Impressions, you will see some parts over. But it's really quite impressive how much of this is new, because even if they show a scene, for example, the Ike the Spike scene with stabbing Lorraine, that's shown in the 5 hour one, but it's shown in a much shorter time frame. It's cut a lot more.
Yes.
Whereas we get to see a lot more of that develop with this particular feature. And with regards to the Ike the Spike scene, it was so interesting kind of watching the dynamic between the actor Frank the Spike and David Lynch kind of going back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
With Lorraine's actor just kind of chilling there dead, just kind of presumably just kind of hanging out, by the way, knowing she's about to get stabbed multiple times. And David Lynch just shouting, kill her, kill her, kill her. And she's just, chilling. And there was a part that was kind of out of context. Maybe I missed something, but I thought it was out of context in the previous special feature, where David Lynch was talking about something with this scene being kind of like a kindergarten killing. And I didn't get what that was about. But then in this one, you kind of get to see what it was about, because the actor who was doing Ike the Spike, understandably, wasn't wanting to actually hurt the person. That's my interpretation. So he wasn't really knowing how much to stab, because they had these like blood pack things that were supposed to spurt blood when he stabbed, but he wasn't going enough to make the effect that David Lynch wanted. He wanted more violence, more aggressive. So he thought what was going on there was like child's play. We need to really go violent with it.
He's going too soft, like a child coming up to punch you is not going to cause much of effect. In this
Sandlot
case,
stuff, I think he said.
Yeah, Sandlot stuff. In this respect, I think my favorite part personally is you get to see all sorts of personalities popping up in these instances, and to have someone be reserved at first, it's not something too terribly uncommon. What I absolutely adore from Ike the Spike's actor, as opposed to the other actors in the show, though, is definitely on how much he's sort of quick in the response. David Lynch gives him an instruction, he just kind of sort of nods and says, cool. Meanwhile, you see a lot of other people sort of trying to vibe into certain things and ask instructions, similar to Robert Forster playing Frank Truman, in which he's trying to find that guy and trying to find the direction, just trying to find everything. Elspice, it's David Lynch is giving a lot of things into it. It's all right, you're going for this, you're going for that. This is the motion here. It's okay, cool.
I also was really interested with the scene with Albert going out of his vehicle with the umbrella and having the anger at Gene Kelly for the Singing in the Rain.
Yeah.
Because that was a scene that I was never really hugely interested or drawn. It goes by very quickly, and then it's, for me, overshadowed by the appearance of Diane for the first time. So I don't put a lot of thought in the scene. But when you see how much had to go into making it happen, it's one of those things where it made me stop and think about it. Because normally I just think about the media as the media in a vacuum. I don't think about the prep work that goes into it, because you had to plan out, how the water was going to look for it to have the rain effect. Because it wasn't really raining. They had this big sprinkler thing they were doing, right? Like a hose or something.
Yes.
And then you have to set up when the people are going to walk by, so it looks like they're actually populating this area. And then the cars, because the cars are all just waiting outside the view, and then they have to communicate, long distance across different areas when the cars should start driving, so that at all times to give the illusion that they're in a city where there's people walking and there's people driving, when really this is a sanctioned off area, because realistically they can't just have people coming and going during the shooting.
Yes.
It makes total sense intellectually. I just never thought of it. So much work goes into this very small moment where the only reason it's there is to make a Gene Kelly joke and show Albert going into the building.
And when you feel the Gene Kelly joke doesn't hit as much, I can see the reality where someone might have more appreciation after seeing this moment, but I also can see the reality of so much went into this Gene Kelly joke.
It's kind of funny to me. I'd say that next time I see that scene, whenever I rewatch The Return, I'll probably be thinking about them telling the cars to start driving and the people to start walking. Yeah. That'll be my thought process, is this part of the behind the scenes.
A lot of talented people have to coordinate for these scenes to actually exist and be viable. Yeah. And I do think that the crew do a fantastic job getting themselves together and getting themselves organized.
We see the Renzo head again, but then I don't think last time we got to see the corpse of Major Briggs, his body, where Ruth's bed is. So we got to see that, and I don't know what material. It looks like it's rubber or something, but they just kind of unceremoniously cut from a different scene to all of a sudden you're just looking at the prop on the bed with them, and it's just jarring see it.
I find the most jarring thing personally to be them carrying in this body. Yeah. And it's almost like a large baby doll.
Yeah, it doesn't
it seems weightless almost.
It does. That's why I think it's rubber or something. It's hollow inside or something. It's just so interesting because, I'll be honest, it gave me the illusion when I watched The Return. I thought that was kind of an unsettling image to see the body and the headless, neck.
Yes. And in this context, like just being amongst the crew and people, like people worked hard, people did wonderful things with it. It looks hilarious in the context of having to handle it like a prop.
And just hearing the different actors talk about their experiences, there is this sense in which it seems like a large number of the cast and crew, especially the actors, were having a great time. We're having a lot of fun. They found that people were very flexible. People were very like kind of understanding and more like a warm atmosphere of the workplace. I can't remember, was it Jim Belushi who kind of gave that little speech? I remember one of the actors kind of gave a little speech about how he never really is, how good everyone was at working together in different departments.
I'm thinking it's Jim Belushi, but I also
it was
can
multiple people saying things like that.
Multiple people have said something like that. It's just that Jim Belushi comes off as friendly, so he's like the center image inside my brain right there.
He can always be in the center of your mind. When you meditate, think only of Jim.
Honestly, though, it seems that people are very much enjoying this David Lynch atmosphere, and it comes into the credit that we've heard time and time again throughout features or behind-the-scenes information, that it becomes a very close-knit unit for whatever David Lynch ends up working on. Apparently, other projects aren't like it, and I can believe it.
And David Lynch himself, like he kind of mentioned that we're seeing different sides of him in this feature versus the previous, you know, just depending on what's shown to us. He just seems so eager and having like such a fun time.
Yeah.
There's moments where he'll just seem to have joy on his face when he's behind the camera, just enthralled by what he's seeing and how it's turning out. Just, you know, remarking how beautiful something looks on the screen when it's actually happening. But also there's moments where, you know, he'll hear from someone that they want another take just for security or safety, just in case like they need another one. And the way he'll phrase it to an actor is he'll say like, let's do it again for fun. That last one was terrific. We're just doing one more for fun. We're already in the costumes. We're already here. Let's just do one more.
And it doesn't take much to convince him on the sake of like doing another take for safety. He's someone like that enjoys taking the time and just making sure that everything is secure for his own respects. If it means more time and more time to enjoy the art form, that's great.
I believe he's living his best life when he's out there. Like I do believe that he's having a great time. The more time he gets to be on set filming, the better. That's my read of David Lynch.
From him responding to people as like things are slowly moving as he's on the megaphone, to what I think is very nice is like his independent interactions with people like before and after scenes that are going through and sometimes in between. It seems that he is so heavily invested in the process that it's beyond just the creation of his baby. I think that he sees this as a very exciting collaborative art form.
Right, of course. I'm not keeping that.
Please keep it.
No. Right, no, I totally agree. Even scenes that otherwise, again, like the Gene Kelly one, I wouldn't think much about, just seems so much fun to everyone behind the set, where it's that part where Albert is with, I forget her name, but that person who worked at the morgue, that doctor, and they're at the restaurant, and Gordon Cole sees them from kind of the corner away, and he brings Tammy over, right? So in the moment when you watch the show, it's a quick thing. He just calls her over, and there Tammy is. But the amount of time they spend deliberating on how he's supposed to call her, what hand signal to use, what direction to face, and just having a great time laughing while doing it.
No, he seems absolutely getting through it. Like, he seemed happy in the scene, like he was smiling in the moment. That was nice and subtle. But he seems like a giddy child being like, okay, this is how it's going to go.
He tries several different wave styles, at the same time.
It's like seeing what works, and like he's playing with his environment.
Yes.
So I think that the biggest compliment I can give to Gordon Cole is that I think that it gives him a real chance to sort of like fall into this slot that maybe he doesn't get to experience as much, if you will, because of him sitting behind as a director, where he gets to hang out with his friends. And
for
get his
David
project
Lynch
done.
being Gordon Cole,
Yes.
it's a boon to David Lynch.
Yes.
Fair enough. It's also a boon to the audience watching the special feature that they have all these wrap-ups, that we get these moments where we're celebrating a cast member who maybe their scenes are done now, we're done shooting for this character, we're going to give them a round of applause and celebrate.
Yes.
And this was in the last feature as well, but we get some more, and I want to highlight two very important ones that were in this feature that, you know, if you forget everything we talk about, this is the thing I personally want you to remember most.
Only this.
That there was a wrap-up for the vomit, and that'd be Dougie's vomit when he pukes on the floor before being taken to the red room and the socket stuff starts happening. It's that vomit.
Which does feature creamed corn. I just
Does
have to
feature
check
creamed corn.
a lot of special effects
Yeah,
here.
half of this show is actually made out of cream corn. There was
When you open up the
Yeah.
disc in the Z&A collection, there's just like a big
I was
prop
really
that
surprised
pops out.
when we learned that car that turns over with Mr. C, that car's made out of cream corn. It's really weird.
I find it very intriguing that they decided to fully cast Dick Horn as just a can of cream corn.
Yeah,
like it's extremely emotive, like really murdered a person.
With the makeup, the costuming, post-production, they were really able to make that scene quite believable with the CG and everything. Anyway, so the number one is that the vomit gets a rap. They do applaud the vomit. It was a pretty big applause, too.
Yeah.
It got a pretty big pop. And then the second one is that Prissy, the dog that is early on in part 1 or 2, that little dog at the apartment, that one got a rap too, which I'm happy about the dog getting a rap.
Wasn't the dog's name Armstrong?
The dog's character.
Dog's character.
But
they say the character.
Yeah, usually he says the character. He gave the name of the dog.
I like to think that this is actually like combining the entities, so that dog's full name is Prissy Armstrong.
That's also really good as a combo. Also, dog having a first name and a last name is a bold choice already. That's an especially bold choice.
It's a good bold choice.
It's a good bold choice. Also, dogs should get Oscars.
Do you have a dog ready for the Oscars?
No. I was watching a video by Indie Tricks Films that was making an argument, kind of tongue in cheek, but why dogs should get Oscars. I personally, I would extend it. I know it's controversial, maybe to other animals too, and do like an animal acting award. But I think that'd be kind of cool, you know. Also, other things should get awards like stunt work and. Yeah.
I thought that we were going into like inanimate objects.
No,
is it other things?
Canned corn should be eligible. Maybe they would have won more Emmys for Twin Peaks if that would have been a category. Best in corn goes to. Have to make sure they really clarify. They say corn and then don't say other words because that'd be really confusing.
Yeah, I would.
For the daytime awards, let's be clear what we're talking about. Anyway. One last kind of fun moment. They were trying. This was less of like a fun as an ahaha, but more as a fun to watch for me. Is David Lynch trying to figure out how to have Cheryl Lee falling down as Laura in the Red Room? Because the initial idea, she looked like she was still standing, and then he like jokingly said, "Hey, Cheryl Lee, can we drop you from a beam up here?" And then, of course, she's like, "Oh yeah, sure, David, like, let's go ahead." So there was a good amount of fun of like, how are we going to get this shot figured out? And did they ever resolve that? I don't think they did.
I don't think they did.
Because my guess, and this is where in the comments you can tell me how wrong I am, please. Actually,
please.
I'm curious.
It's right there.
I'm thinking this was the part where David Lynch took that like phone or like camera and brought it up really close above her and like shook it when she was screaming. Because I think we saw that in the 5-hour one, and I've definitely seen that from other places before, where he took like a phone or a small camera and shook it, and that's what kind of had her freak out.
From what my memory is, I do believe that it's in this special feature too, where he's like kneeling
okay, because I was thinking maybe that was the part they were trying to figure out, and that was the solution to it. So I don't know. I don't really, not sure. In addition to kind of the fun moments, we do get to see more dynamics between him and the actors. A lot of them aren't as like idle talking before a scene the way that the other feature had them. This is more them on the set in the moment. But one of the through lines I would say is that there's a lot of points at which Lynch will get pretty close to an actor and have like a quieter sort of voice. It's not, with everyone. Sometimes he alters it a bit, but it seems like when you're talking to David Lynch, he's often very calm and quiet with his actors.
And it's also something I'm thankful that we're able to see a highlight on Grace Zabriskie later on inside of this feature, because beforehand we were curious on like how he might like approach everyone else in these certain fashions, and we had him in this very like quiet focused tone inside this. It seems that he still is in that sort of somewhat quiet format, but in a less serious moment. It seems like it depends on the moment in the time.
The scene and the actor, very, very much so. Very, very much so. But in general, he just seems to have more of a quiet and calming presence. Yeah. Even when the moment is pretty intense. But then I think of like moments where he's like trying to get an emotion out. He will switch. So like when he's yelling at the Spike performer to kill her, he gets aggressive with it because he's trying to transfer that emotion. It's not that he's yelling at the performer. That's not how I read it. It's more trying to like urge the violence.
Stab the damn blood packets. They need to bleed.
And he wants to make sure that the bleeding goes slow. And what I mean by that is that when he's making...
No, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like it wanted to go fast.
That's my segue. What do you mean? It was perfect. The other thing is that David Lynch very much is constantly talking to his actors about slowing down performances. We've heard this before in other, not even just in Twin Peaks special features, but in general, that's usually what he recommends to his performers. But this is something where we get to see it firsthand, where so many of these moments he'll say, don't rush, take your time, wait longer. Like I remember with the waitress that shows up in part 17, especially how she's pouring the coffee, he really wanted to make sure that she took her time with every single motion. And I think that's interesting. I think that for some scenes, it really, really builds an emotion that you wouldn't get out of most directors because they would rush it quicker. They wouldn't let it build up the sort of mystery. So like the part 17 waitress stuff I kind of get, because when you're trapped in the mindset of part 17, time is wonky. Yes. And like, I think things taking an uncomfortable amount of time lets the feelings and confusion settle in a really interesting way. Then the other one that I'm not going to ramble about because I could get really off topic, Professor Stop Me, is the French woman scene where he kind of explains it that she's not taking her time on purpose. This is just what, a French girl does when she leaves the apartment. And he like tells her how she has to look at him for everything if she does. And it's just, that's a scene I got feelings on. So I think for some scenes, it makes sense to build the slowness. And then for others, I'm like, you really like slow things, don't you, David Lynch?
It seems that the actor he told it to the most to is Twin Peaks: The Return as like its entirety.
Yeah.
It like take your time and take your moments. It's very much the theming. It very much is the theming of his director style and status throughout the production on what he felt and the things that he was most nervous about in multiple cases.
Do you think he ever once told a single actor to speed up something? Like, I'm actually serious. Do you think he ever told an actor, can we do that but faster?
I don't think so either. Like,
not many we saw.
I don't foresee it, and there's no evidence that we have at the moment.
Nothing. That's wild.
And if there's no evidence against us, that means it's basically true.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, we're in the clear now.
Legally Blonde, yeah. I never seen that movie yet.
We're Legally Blonde.
I do want to see Legally Blonde at some point. I feel like it's one of those films that's talked about through the hallowed halls of early 2000s girl cinema, the same way that I would hear people talk about Mean Girls. And the hype was true. Devil Wears Prada, the hype was true. So I'm going to go into Legally Blonde, assuming it's as a high quality. Different genres, different things it's working with. I'm raising expectations.
I'm very excited for our 5th sequel podcast.
With your clone.
With
your genre clone.
With my genre clone, they'll have the time for it to go into the Legally Blonde series with you.
Yes, yeah. We don't talk about what happens to the Professor after this podcast finish. If you ever hear from him again, it's his clone. So anyway, we were talking about David Lynch with actors. One of the ones that continues to be pretty interesting is Sherilyn Fenn. The dynamic that we see on set, I don't know if it's one-to-one the same kind of uncomfortable tension that maybe I was feeling last time. Mm-hmm. I don't sense the tension as much. I sense a lot more closeness. Mm-hmm. But it's still a remarkable closeness in the sense of it's something to remark upon. I don't understand it. I feel like I'm so outside the situation to judge it. So when he's approaching her and talking with her, he refers to her as Little Sherilyn Fenn, which I know he likes pet names. He calls Kyle MacLachlan Kale. Kyle and Dale mixed together. That's cute. And he calls Machen Amek Madchkin, and we know about that one. I don't know. Most of the time he calls people by their character name.
Yes.
And sometimes he does call her Audrey. I remember him calling her Audrey before on the set.
Yes.
So Little Sherilyn Fenn, I don't know what to make of that, because you looked it up, Professor, and Audrey's actor Sherilyn Fenn was 25 when they first shot Twin Peaks, right? Roughly
25 if 1990 is like the center point.
Right. So, already in her mid-20s when he met her. So it's not like he met her as like a child actor or something. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting. But then her response, like when she was talking to him, is she repeatedly says, I love you to him. Like there seems to be a strong kind of affection, which is so interesting when I compare it to the tension that I thought I was feeling from last time they spoke that I saw. So I still don't understand their dynamic. I would love to be a fly on the wall for more of their conversations, just because it's like looking into a lava lamp and I'm trying to understand how it works. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down.
Sometimes it's just kind of like...
It's globby.
It's sometimes it's just not... You can't... How do you maneuver
if you were to
glob
do
in that way?
Family Feud... And it's like survey asked 100 people, name something globby. Number 1, lava lamp. It's the most globby thing. What's globbier?
What's globier? An actual glob goo.
Okay, what's that?
Like you make goo
you can't
in
just say
science
goo.
class.
Okay,
You
no
can't-
one's.
This is a goo
Okay,
accepting
you're the
household.
person. So the family decides to take the question, and then it goes to you, and you're like, it's goo, and then they're like, okay,
This is a
okay.
popularity contest
You
of
say
100
goo.
people and a
Yeah,
random
yeah.
all in America come
Yes.
together and they say something globby. They're not thinking globalab. When you
Okay.
think glob, you think goo. And I'll tell you right now, the other 4 options are food.
Okay, so you said goo. Steve Harvey's going to look at you, I think he's still hosting, and he's going to ask you to be more specific. They need you to be more specific. And you're going to say science class goo. And then he's going to make fun of you publicly on TV.
And what happens every time that happens? People get the number 1 and 2
It's gonna be an
answer.
X.
That's just
It's
how
gonna
it
be an X.
goes.
It's gonna be
no,
an X.
This is not the foretelling of the Steve Harvey reaction.
Also, glue is pretty globby.
I'll take glue.
Glue, yeah.
Which is part of the process to make science goo.
Yeah, I mean, as far as foods that are globby, I mean, Jello's not globby. Pudding's kind of globby. I mean, like,
I can see, but again, it's a survey. So
Yeah.
I think that, like Jello or pudding are probably the high contenders. And maybe if David Lynch is in the survey somewhere, creamed corn.
I would say that some of the things that come out of Dougie's mouth are kind of globby. Vomits, orbs. His head became an orb. It didn't come out of his mouth. But that's my segue to talk about how really funny it was. I just want to say how funny it was watching the scene of Kyle MacLachlan shriveling his body down into Dougie's clothing in the Red Room when it was that green jacket Dougie. It's just, he just does such a good job.
It does.
Kyle MacLachlan just does such a good job at like everything in The Return. How does he do it?
He's a talented guy that has been in many pictures, and I think that he was working with a director that really works with him.
You're just told, hey, shrink into your shirt, and then he just does that.
He just does it.
He does such a good job.
It is not even just like a cool. It transcends description, except it's right there.
He even was going to let Naomi Watts slap him to practice for the slap scene when she wouldn't want to do that to David Lynch. Because David Lynch was trying to get her to do a good slap, and he was like, slap me. And she was like, no, David, I don't want to, but in like an Australian accent and less dramatic. But so basically nothing like what I just sounded like. Just pretend that was an Australian woman being less dramatic, and it's the same thing. And Kyle MacLachlan, such a guy.
I think that he is someone that's very dedicated to his path as far as acting goes.
Everything I know about him, at least,
Yeah.
It just seems like a great performer, an actor's actor. Hats off.
What? No, thumbs up.
Thumbs up, hats off.
Why would you take your... He doesn't wear a hat. When does he wear
I
ever
throw
wear
the
a
hat up in the air because it's his graduation.
Who's graduating? Why?
Kyle MacLachlan.
Where to?
He's graduating to Las Vegas because we're talking about the Mitchums. Last time I was talking about how good the casting was for Jim Belushi being Bradley Mitchum, and it's still great. Still love that casting. But I did not give proper credit where credit is due, I feel personally, to the other Mitchum brother, Robert Knepper. That's the actor. And the thing that really stood out to me with Robert Knepper was the conga line. We got to see that being shot, and they had to do multiple takes of this conga line. And yes, everyone had to sing and dance, whatever. But he was clearly, one, he was in front, so he was the first thing we see. But he was setting the tone of that conga line. The first time they ran through it, he was the only one singing and shouting. And he even made a comment like, "Am I the only one singing and shouting?" Like he wanted to get everyone else kind of on the hype level, and he just kept improvised dancing and singing and making sound effects the whole entire time. And it's so good. Because most of the scenes we get with this guy, he's the straight man to Jim Belushi's antics. He's generally more like the serious one, especially in the showdown with the pie, where he gets to be the threatening kind of dangerous Mitchum.
He's someone who is very willing to, in this moment, turn things up to 11 and even crank up the notches a little bit further onto it, which I thoroughly appreciate. Even when it came to a safety shot where they're just that's perfect. We're just going to do another shot. It's basically a shot that you still are putting on the performance, but still the other shot sounds like a good, we can go home sort of situation. But still, no, from what I could tell, each time he's putting his all
Robert
into the
Knepper,
conga.
if acting was a cooking show, he is the emerald of actors.
What's Emerald?
Emerald was this guy who I used to have this show on the Food Network, and his catchphrase, he'd always like put some garlic or spices. He would say, he's going to kick it up a notch. He was always kicking it up a notch. I don't know why he had a catchphrase. That's not normally a thing I think that cooking shows have to have, but he had one.
You have to stand out when your competition is Guy Ferrari.
Guy Ferrari.
This catchphrase is his hair and his flame
I'm
shirt.
making you're saying Guy Ferrari is a joke, right?
Guy Ferrari?
Guy Fieri.
Fieri.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Did you? Okay, I thought Guy Ferrari was a joke, so I kind of imitated it, but I didn't. And then you didn't go with it, so I wasn't sure.
But you know what I'm talking about when I say
Yes.
Guy Ferrari.
I mean,
though.
who else would it be? Guy
long
Ritchie?
lines.
Yeah, you actually meant Guy Ritchie because Ferraris are expensive, so he's rich to have one. You know, the famous cook, Guy Ritchie.
There are endless people whose name is Guy. So
God, this-
like, it's such a neutral
Okay, this
statement.
podcast has a weird energy. This episode, something's going on in the kitchen.
It's bucking
Too
around,
many
taking
cooks.
its time.
Too
Almost
many cooks.
like this episode. Like, not like the episode of like seeing all these pieces jumble into things that just take all the time they need.
Hey, you said you had a good time.
You're
with
not
it, so.
editing this, by the way,
I'm
are
editing.
you?
Oh,
Just
It
don't
would be pretty
edit it.
funny to not edit.
Fully every single point, every
Every
pause,
awkward
tech.
thing. I mean, there haven't been that many, but like.
It's the behind the scenes like you've never experienced nor you asked for, but it's gonna be there anyway.
Anyway, I just want to highlight before we move on to Robert Knepper. I didn't even realize this. I don't think I said it before. He was one of the voices in the Secret History of Twin Peaks audio.
Oh.
He was Dougie Milford.
Ah, really?
So, you know, the warden was the voice of like Major Briggs, which is the archivist, right? Spoilers, I guess.
Yeah.
And then if you haven't read them, sorry.
Sorry.
You went out of order a little too much. And then, yeah, Dougie Milford, Robert Knepper. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that.
I did not. I never would. I didn't
appreciate
even
that.
notice.
I didn't notice either.
I would have to re-listen to Dougie to like hear that, I guess.
No, I from what I recall, he seemed to be fitting for the role. I
Yeah.
think that like it wasn't no cast or anything like that. So fantastic! Congratulations on being the Dougie.
A couple other things. Sam and Tracy, when they're doing their gather round, Tracy's blowing bubbles.
Yes, she is. She is blowing the bubble. Who gave her bubbles? Did she bring her own bubbles?
I think it's fun. I just like to believe she just has bubbles on her at all times,
At
just in case.
Every moment.
That
calls for bubbles.
I feel silly bringing it up because there's like nothing to say about it, but I also do think it's funny to think about because, like you said, why does she have them? Like, who gave her the bubbles, or did she bring them knowing it was her last shooting day and wanted to have them? Like, I want to know the backstory of these bubbles.
And the thing is, we don't need the backstory and the bubbles, but it's something that I think carries over the tone from the cast and crew.
Well, I'm
so
sure any
nicely.
backstory they give me would not be as entertaining as the mystery.
No, it won't be as entertaining as the mystery, but say, for example, you come as cast or crew, and even if you come out to find the answer while you're working there, you see someone bring bubbles onto the set. And it seems to be having a great time with bubbles. Why would you not be smiling?
That's great.
It's a good
And
time.
speaking of great time smiling, the woodsman from part 8.
I'm no longer smiling.
Well, I think it's interesting because depending on, your sensibilities, you might find them kind of frightening looking in the return. I think once you take away the lighting effects and you just see a bunch of dudes just kind of hanging out with like, kind of charcoal on their face, I don't get any fear, like scary vibes from the woodsman at all during the behind the scenes.
What about when they're told to like knead the slog as a little test for kneading the coop, like the Mr. C, just like this little like weird fabric catalog that they're just scratching at.
Yeah, I find it takes all the intimidation out of them, which is really funny. Just to see it all happen that way. I don't know.
It's one of the best parts of Dissonance that behind the scenes like this creates.
Yes. So the biggest chunk in my notes is the stuff that I thought was interesting to kind of branch off of for potential story implications. David Lynch is very famously cryptic. He often does not give away his thoughts and feelings or interpretations, but there are moments where he'll say something or do something that maybe you gotta go, you could take this and run with it if you wanted. And I just want to say this now so we don't have to ever say it again for the rest of this podcast. We have previously identified that we are more on the death of the author side.
Yes.
So whenever I bring up any of these examples of David Lynch saying something or an actor saying something, it's only if you want to run with it. If you think that David Lynch saying something changes your mind about interpreting a scene, that's up to you. You can pretend it wasn't there. You can say that it was there, but maybe the intention didn't happen on the screen. Or you could say David Lynch is the author. If he says it's the case, it's the case. We're generally more on the side of, even if David Lynch says something, if we can find enough evidence in the final product of the story that kind of goes against it, I'm still willing to go look at other interpretations. I don't think it's the end-all be-all, and I think very few of these examples are declarative.
Yes.
But I think they're fun to jump away from and just kind of use as, things to jump from. So the first one isn't necessarily like a reveal or context for something we've already been given. It's a line that appears to have been shot, if I had to guess, if they were about to shoot it, and it did not get in the actual product. If there was a missing pieces of the return, this might be in there if it's a long enough moment. And that is right away in part 1, there was going to be a line of dialogue between Cooper and the fireman in that black and white area where the fireman was going to tell Cooper to beware the 13th sycamore. This is a line that did not get, obviously, brought in. There is a video on the subject, if you are interested,
on Arby's website,
from Obnoxious and Anonymous on YouTube. Gonna pretend the Arby's thing didn't happen. And so if you're interested in the subject, even something as, like, kind of, I don't know, esoteric or kind of just out there as a line that was cut from the behind the scenes that never made it in the show, you could still do analysis on that and try to, like, find evidence of what the 13th sycamore might have been. So I guess my question for you, without having done all that research and rewatching the show and combing for evidence, when it's said to beware the 13th sycamore, do you have any idea what that could have been? Because presumably it would have referenced something in the show already, unless they cut something else out later. So what do you think the 13th sycamore would have been?
I think that for the most part, like, we've seen sycamore trees lined up and sort of circling the little pit. We know the evolution of the arm is a sycamore tree with this little, like, gum wad at the top of it. I'm thinking that if there's ever something to beware, if you want to put the reading of the evolution of the arm, sure. I'm thinking more the doppelganger.
Okay, that's
like
the 13th.
Yes, it's
the
a false
unlucky one.
It's where, like, 12 sycamores potentially, like, circling a spot or whatever, like, comes in. Like, 12 seems to be, like, a very...
It's a biblical number, if nothing else.
Biblical number,
right,
if you will. And biblical...
Whereas 13 has the cursed implications.
Exactly. And seeing as there are entities that can be beyond, that can be duplicated and can cause harm, as we saw with the little bit of lashings out, I feel that if there had to be, like, a 13th sycamore represented, it probably is that in the show.
We also get to see David Lynch talking through one of the Gordon Cole scenes, and I believe he's talking to Miguel Ferreira, Albert's actor, about kind of what's going to happen and before Albert enters. And it's that part when Gordon Cole opens the door and we as viewers see maybe a flashback, you want to say, of Laura Palmer from Fire Walk With Me, kind of sobbing at the door. And I believe originally that was her at Donna's door, but has now been swapped out for Gordon Cole's. And then it cuts to Gordon Cole, and then Albert shows up, and it's never brought up again. It's never really mentioned. And I'm pretty sure when we got to that part in the podcast, when this episode actually was being viewed and discussed, we weren't really 100% sure what to say if Gordon Cole had seen Laura or if we're just seeing it. Like, it seems implied that Gordon Cole saw Laura because it cuts back to him, but it doesn't seem like he had a clear reaction. We weren't really sure what he thought or felt about this if he saw it. And again, never brought up later. So this potentially could clear it up for you, is that David Lynch does say when he's going through the scene that he sees Laura Palmer at the door. That was what his stated intention was for Gordon Cole to witness it. So I want to spin this back into that question that now that we've maybe had more context finishing the return, what do you think was going on, if you have any thoughts, on why Gordon Cole opened the door and saw Laura Palmer if it was never followed up directly anywhere else that I can think of?
The biggest thing that I could say, prefacing it with, I'm happy David Lynch gets the chance to act. I'm glad that he has this moment to enjoy himself because it seems that he's enjoying his role. But at the end of the day, I think it's just putting more importance on Gordon Cole, which, like, he hasn't had that much importance before other than being on the side.
Prophetic vision.
And the fact that electricity runs through his ears.
Sure. So he experiences, I mean, I said prophetic vision, but it's more of the past than the future. But what is the past if not the future?
Is it future or is it past?
Probably past.
It's
Probably past.
I'd
I'd say very strongly past.
I think that's a difference of fact.
So the problem is Twin Peaks is open enough, you could probably make a case that he saw Laura Palmer from the future somehow. You could probably make a case for that. And I do want to acknowledge as well that I could be missing some sort of prior context before, or maybe something that happens after that, like, it's not Gordon Cole that matters here. It's that Laura is shown, and that relates to something else. It's just when it happened, I was kind of confused what it was supposed to be, because I think it was treated kind of like a jump scare, but then, like, not really. And Gordon doesn't have any real closeness to the Laura situation other than, like, 25 years ago, we had someone go investigate it. So I'm just looking at, like, I really don't know what to think. And if it was just to have, like, Laura being shown and flashback to Laura, if Gordon Cole wasn't the important part, I would have rather personally had this go to Andy instead of Gordon Cole. And this is, I'm not even sure if this would change the intent, if it even matters. But the reason why I would say it maybe makes a little more sense for Andy is that this could have been one of the first signs that Andy was having this sort of spiritual connection. Because otherwise, we get it later with the firemen and with the stuff with Nido. This could have been an early sign that something was already going on with Andy. It could be something for us to watch in Andy, so maybe it pays off later when he has the fireman moment. I wouldn't mind a little bit of setup and payoff for that, if we're going to do this with someone.
Yes, but again, I do think that Gordon Cole was a choice made that...
Yeah. I just don't see it in the narrative. Like, I don't know why it would be Gordon Cole in the story reasons.
Yeah.
Unless I'm missing something, which is, of course, the Twin Peaks. It could always be that.
Come back in 5 more years for the missing pieces.
Come back in 25 more years. We would like it.
What's the equivalent of Tumblr? Like, I remember
Tumblr still exists.
Yes, but Tumblr was where, like, the missing pieces were first, like, released.
Yeah.
And around that time, I think that Tumblr was, like, in that, like, semi-large situation. So what's, like, the Tumblr of today? Or is it still Tumblr? Is Tumblr just, like, stayed in, like, this steady, like, non-heartbeat?
I mean, it's hard because Tumblr was never as big as something like, Instagram. Like, it's not the Titan. It's never been that huge.
It's going to release it in chunks in Instagram.
YouTube Shorts is the equivalent.
Shorts.
Everyone knows what it is, but it's not as big. Like, that's Tumblr. YouTube Shorts. It's going to be in YouTube Shorts, 1-minute clips. Do you know what the max is for YouTube Shorts? He's Googling. I'm not editing this out because this is an unedited podcast.
I've made shorts before. 60 seconds. Up to 60 seconds.
So there's going to be 1 minute per piece of every single deleted moment for the missing pieces. And then they're going to be in question, is it a series or is it a movie? Because it's going to be told in 1 minute sections.
I like to think, like, there's going to be, like, David Lynch really leans into the clickbaitiness that there's not much to sustain. So it's one of those points where it's like for part 2, like for part 3. And it gets to the obscene number, like for part 374.
Speaking of obscene unknown futures, Richard Horne meets his unfortunate, great, love it to happen to him, love it for him, end when he gets bolted by lightning. And we have the actor, I believe his name is like Eamon, is how they pronounce it. And he's talking to David Lynch, and they're talking about how his character is going to get fried and die and everything. And then David Lynch makes this kind of comment where he says, "You'll come back to life in the Roadhouse." And it's spoken in this sort of tone where I can interpret that to be entirely a joke, that it's more just like, oh, I'm sorry your character died, but he'll come back somewhere else. And of course he doesn't come back, and it was just a little joke, don't read into it. But it did get my mind gears a-whirring, because if you take it very literally, it could be implying that the Roadhouse is some kind of afterlife. I do think there's a pretty strong argument against interpreting all of the Roadhouse as an afterlife, because then you have to contend with the Roadhouse in seasons 1 and 2. The Roadhouse and Fire Walk With Me, but also moments in The Return when people like Shelley and James and Freddie and Chad are just kind of walking in there. I don't think they're going into the afterlife in and out. You'd have to draw a line of which Roadhouse parts are afterlife. I think the most suspicious one would be Audrey's for a lot of reasons. And you could argue maybe that one's a little weird because of the way everyone is doing the Audrey dance and knows what it is. But I don't know how seriously to take this line.
Honestly, like, and this might lead to the largest tangent. Like, this is probably where things getting rocky. So I hope you're gonna be with me for this.
If you're gonna be Rocky, I'll be Rodent.
Brilliant. So the first thing I want to, before I even begin,
Yeah, that joke was for the one of you in the audience who knows what Rocky Rodent is.
Congratulations, you made it, kid. The first preface question before I get to any of this in.
Yes.
Do you recognize the giant and the fireman as a singular entity or separate entities played by the same actor?
If you put me on the spot right now, knowing my opinions can change anytime, I would guess he's an evolution. I would say that the fireman is the evolution of the giant.
And from what we understand from the fireman, may have some connection to Margaret Lannerman, the log, and also her
My
past husband.
headcanon, going off of your theories from early on, is that the wooden grain appearance of the black and white areas heavily indicates to me they may be inside of trees or very likely the log that is speaking to Margaret Lannerman.
There are connections of potentially past people. We've seen it inside of Secret Life of Twin Peaks that get themselves involved in more mystical areas.
Mm-hmm.
I bring this all up because the Roadhouse is a featured point, if we look back into classic Twin Peaks, of people such as the fireman appearing before Cooper.
People go there the night of Laura Palmer's death, which already has so much of heavy connotations, and the parts where, the killer reveal episode where they're going there and we have the giant, like you said.
Yes, or even like Julie Cruz.
Who fades in and out of existence.
Fades in and out of existence, but still is very much playing. This is where Margaret Lannerman comes from time to time and seems to be vibing with the location. I'm not saying the double R is mystical, but I do think that, this is a weirder scene for the log lady to sit at, if it not for potentially mystical means.
And music itself seems to have a mystical connotation where someone like Audrey Horne can hear the music in the air. Obviously, Red Room, the music in the air. There's kind of a magical or even meta reading you could do of that.
I think that the usage of music and electricity leans into a lot of David Lynch's sort of very open spiritualistic
it's a
sort
dreamy
of
area.
style. It's a dreamy area, and I think that that's where we get a lot more lean into music inside of The Return because of things like that, and likely from the moods that it creates. I do believe that if there are evolutions of beings and spirits that do appear inside the Roadhouse, a facet of what Dick Horn was could potentially find itself there. After all, he blew up in lightning, but from what every other example we saw of people being trapped thanks to Mr. C, it seems to be a case where they keep appearing inside of the Red Room instead.
Of course, where it gets complicated, we have seen him in the Red Room, and that was the Chad scene where he was going after women against their will. So we have seen him before in the Roadhouse.
The tone of the Roadhouse, and that's something that I want to get into a little bit more later, but the tone of the Roadhouse does change between series. I want to acknowledge that firsthand, but first and foremost, I do think that David Lynch is trying to read into that spiritual nature of electricity. I think that one of my favorite examples from specifically this set of special features is with Robert Forster, who, as he's talking to David Lynch over talking about the time and how 2:52 ended up coming back multiple times. I believe it was 2:52. It was something where Robert Forster looks at his clock. He's like, oh, it's just a minute away from that. And David Lynch is in awe of this moment.
2:53.
2:53. Thank you. It's 2:53. So that's where I probably get 2:52.
I had to just double check before I said the wrong thing.
Yes. So he's talking about 2:53 and he's like, oh, it's about a minute till there. It's like, oh, really? And then he starts saying bzzz, he makes the sound of electricity while he puts the hands around his head. So I think he really does lean into these sort of
he's big into numerology.
Ideals.
It seems like it's a genuine thing he's really interested in.
I find it exciting, but I do think that also leans into the darker nature of the Roadhouse that we are seeing now. Beforehand, this was a hub of a little bit of respite for Laura Palmer for a moment, if you read it as that. She gets
a connecting point to some bad things too.
But they went to a separate bar for those bad things.
They
did go to it. But there's still people lurking in that. And Jock still is someone who runs it along with his endless line of families. I recognize that there's darker entities in there. But I will also say that with the presence of the giant, the presence of Margaret Lannerman, in early Twin Peaks, it was more peaceful. And we lean into things becoming far peaceful with every scene with the Roadhouse and the Return.
Yeah, there's hardly any conversation at the Roadhouse with any of the random new characters, the one-off characters, that is a good conversation.
Yes.
They're either people who are suffering, or like they witness suffering, or their family is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Or, it's not good. Like, people have horrible rashes and they're seeing terrible things and they're crawling on the floor.
Exactly, and screaming, crawling
right,
on the floor
like
in
that's
the middle of
when
the
I
music.
think of Roadhouse conversations. I am not thinking, someone talking about how good of a day they had yesterday going to a party or something. No. Nothing good happens there. And that is, of course, interesting to think about. The other thing I was also just kind of, Jimmy Neutron brain blasting about is that, the previous kind of performer around red curtains sort of imagery and blue and red imagery, I think of from Blue Velvet with Dorothy Valens singing, and then we have like Jeffrey going to see her sing.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously then that connects that sort of environment, that sort of venue
Mm-hmm.
to not necessarily spiritual things, but to a place of beauty, but also suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That she is this beautiful singer and kind of an enrapturing presence to Jeffrey.
Mm-hmm.
But the more he goes in, the more he finds out about the violence of Frank Booth kind of lurking on the corner, and the sort of trauma and like layering of what she's dealing with psychologically and that's hurting her.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of maybe that music comes from, is that place of hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you already have that connection. So for the Roadhouse to be an endless connection of Renaults, right? From the previous Jacques Renault to, I forget it, Jean-Jacques Renault, I think is the one that's in The Return,
no.
right? It's one of those. That endless chain of connecting these night places of respite, as you said. But even when it's at its most calming, it is still connected to suffering. It is still connected to harm.
Yes.
That's interesting as a connection that seems pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm.
You know what else is a thing of harm? A frog moth.
Me. Oh.
Are you a frog moth?
No.
Please don't.
I don't think
crawl
so.
into anyone's mouth.
I can't make promises except for today.
Okay.
Tomorrow's another day.
Tomorrow's another day. I hope your clone isn't like this. So anyway, the frog moth, I just wanted to note that I always thought the frog moth thing was like a fan name, because in the quinoa, the David Lynch Makes Quinoa little short thing, he refers to this memory he has about there being frog moths in the air. And I just assumed the fan base kind of ran with that term, because you look at the thing and it's like, yeah, that's a frog moth. I agree. Great name for it. But no, David Lynch does call it that. He straight up says it's a frog moth, and they have a little prop for it with the girl and everything.
Maybe the thing is that I've been saying that this is likely a situation with Sarah Palmer where the frog moth crawls into the little girl's mouth. Maybe the little girl is David Lynch, and the frog moth is crawling into David Lynch's
Not Gordon
mouth.
Cole?
Not Gordon Cole, just David Lynch.
all right.
Because it was David Lynch's memory, not Gordon Cole's.
Right.
Don't get crazy here, Kalil.
Okay.
Gordon Cole is the one who's the character in that reality.
Yeah.
That's the dream character, Kalil.
Yes. Speaking of dreams, Lynch tells the actor for Senorita Dido or Dido, you choose. They tell that actor that she is like a doll in a dream. And I can see calling her a doll. I can see what he's going for, kind of telling her to take little steps and kind of have this sort of sense of wonderment. There's a sort of childlike wonder and kind of simplicity to some of the emotions on her face of joy.
Unless you are going into like a theming of Chucky, usually this
Yes.
is an innocent
Which,
item.
quick side note, when I was looking through the In Heaven Everything Is Fine collection of David Lynch-inspired short works, which was released before The Return, there were like 4 stories that had dolls in them, despite that not being a big David Lynch thing, which I just thought was super interesting. And with the doll stuff, it's like normally when they wrote the stories about dolls, they were like the kind of creepy dolls of some kind. It was used for an uncanny sense. So the one time I have evidence of David Lynch like really invoking a doll, it's to one of the figures of, I would assume, brightness. I don't get malevolence out of Senorita Dido doo-wop.
No, I think that as far as the Senorito is concerned...
The Senorita, but it's fine.
Thank you. Is that this is a more innocent being able to actually hold on to that one orb and send it off into the world. And that whatever that orb is, in this case, Laura Palmer, whatever you think that is, the good, whatever. I do think that they are trying to go for an innocent entity, a pure entity,
right.
Something that is going to be very I suppose angelic. He even like uses the
Right.
description of a cherub like steps.
That's the way. Yeah, again, if you want to run with those lines, literally describes be like a doll, but also be like a cherub. And it's like, I don't think she's the same angel that appeared to Laura. I don't think they're meant to look the same. But to think there is an angelic equivalence that previously angels were in Fire Walk with Me, this is a close enough thing we get to an angel. It could be invoking a similar idea
Do you think
of
that?
hope for Laura.
Do you think that in heaven everything is fine?
I think that in Twin Peaks, heaven doesn't exist. I'm not saying, our world. I'm not saying other fictional worlds. I'm saying in Twin Peaks, I don't think heaven exists.
What if the heaven is just the Mauve Zone?
I think the hard part, too, now you're going to get me on a tangent. The hard part, too, is that the closest I think we ever got to heaven are the angel that appeared for Laura Palmer at Fire Walk with Me, and Major Briggs's vision of being on the veranda of that vast estate with his son Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
And the return seems to slash the tires of both of those to me, where it rips away Laura's happy angel, if you want to say it's happy, rips away the angel ending to have all the, whatever Dale Cooper's doing a time travel. There's arguments for that.
And they just blew Briggs up.
And then Briggs, I don't get happy veranda anytime in the future.
No.
Unless this is, the veranda thing takes place after the return. But currently, he's a floating head that just kind of mimics certain phrases.
Maybe
like
they
Blue
buried
Rose.
the body on a veranda.
I don't know. I do have mixed feelings on that, but I think it would lead me to think that in the return, at least, there isn't much happy endings in the afterlife. I mean, who is the happiest person we see that's dead? We see multiple apparitions of either the dead soul or like a doppelganger tulpa or whatever, but they all seem to be like malevolent or suffering or eerily neutral. Who's happiest? Maybe this angel? That's probably the happiest you're going to get, and I'm not even sure she was ever a person. Like, I don't know if she died and became that.
I feel like
This is also the
Dick
big question.
Tremaine is the happiest person because I think that even at his worst days...
You mean Dick Horn?
No, Dick Tremaine.
Wait, what? I said dead person. Dick Tremaine, we don't have any
I had
he's
never
dead.
seen him again.
What
so I
doesn't mean
assume
he's dead?
He's probably dead.
That's not how this
I
works.
don't believe that man can walk another 20 years without walking straight into traffic while smoking.
He'll come back when he's 90, run for mayor, and win. I like to think that that's the only way this is going to work at the end.
Dick Tremaine for mayor since.
What?
It's like president, but it's mayor.
Oh, okay. So mentioned the Mitchums earlier, mentioned Rodney. I regret to inform you that we could not identify any closer with the camera footage what Rodney's breakfast was. We had previously speculated that's probably corn cereal, but it could just be corn with milk. Now, nothing was said to indicate he's eating this disgusting bowl of corn milk, so I'm going to assume it is cereal, but it is not clarified. Whereas the Mitchum brother, Bradley, we do see a box of Raisin Bran being pushed as his favorite cereal. David Lynch says, this is your favorite cereal. Making a face at me, Professor.
Honestly, as far as I'm concerned, like it's a pretty solid cereal, don't you?
Raisin
agree?
Bran? I actually haven't had Raisin Bran since I was a kid. And when I was a kid, I thought it was gross. My problem would be the texture. I don't understand how the raisins would work with the cereal.
It's chewy with the shop, but you could choose. Like I like it dry. Some people like it with milk, so it softens up. But it's a nice balance between like a.
I was a
chewy
Reese's
and a
Puffs
crunch.
kid, so I think it tells you a lot about me.
Reese's Puffs, rookie, Raisin Bran.
Reese's Puffs. If it was a fight, Reese's Puffs would punch Raisin Bran's light out. That sun, that's the light. The sun that's above the Raisin Bran, the logo, the sun.
Get out.
Punch him.
Get out.
I don't know what.
This is not.
Did Reese's Puffs ever have like a character or like a logo to do the punching?
I think it was just the box. I'm pretty sure the mascot was just the box to present itself as like, I'm Reese's Puffs.
The box will just have ripped arms and just punch the logo.
It's this weird dichotomy where like there's just certain cereals that outweigh like the idea of having a mascot like Corn Pops.
Yeah.
Corn Pops, conceptually, you just had to think of a horrifying situation where children are dying over this cereal, literally dying in these commercials. For Reese's Puffs, it was accompanied with like bouncing cars and just
That's why it's the best.
Like
Love
spinning on a Reese's while
It's so good.
cranking 90s
That's
on
how
their
early
Fortnite
2000s.
skateboards.
Okay. Early 2000s.
It had the same mood.
And Fortnite had not existed yet. Do not slander.
It had the mood, though. You
Okay.
cannot deny.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of moods, This is the best segue I got because Reese's Puffs wasn't giving me very much. Speaking of moods, Lynch is talking to the Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern as far as the Cooper and Diane scene. I think it was in end of part 17. Maybe it was beginning of part 18. I get it kind of blurred in my head. When Cooper goes out of the red curtains and he sees Diane and he's like, is it you? And then she's like, is it you? Or I can't remember which one says it first. And they're talking about this. And David Lynch is kind of prepping them for this moment. And he's talking and he says that, you two, you were a hell of a team. And then 25 years passed and now you're seeing each other. And he talks about how they're not really sure and they're kind of trying to, feel it out. But then when they kiss, they kind of understand, and there's a certain knowledge that comes from that kiss. And the thing that kind of stood out to me is this phrasing of a hell of a team. So I'm going to kind of run with that for a bit. And my interpretation of that usually is that if someone's a hell of a team, they're really good as a team. You were amazing. But then 25 years passed. And I think that's interesting because when I think of Dale Cooper teaming up with people, I think of great teams with Dale Cooper being him and Sheriff Truman, which he didn't have in The Return. I think of him and Albert, who I don't think he said a single sentence to. I think of him and Gordon Cole, and I think they acknowledged each other for a little bit. They had a couple interactions at the end in part 17 and 18. And those are the main ones that maybe Cooper and Audrey, you could argue, are a team, but they don't really do anything together to be a team. They just kind of knew each other. But they were, a great duo. But the thing with Diane, a lot of it's always just been implied. We weren't even sure with the original show, at least I wasn't, and people at the time when it was airing, can't be 100% sure if Diane was real because the original series, he was just recording tapes. For all we know, Diane's not even a real person. He could just be recording that to like someone he calls Diane. It's just like a psychological thing. We don't know the story on Diane. Then Fire Walk With Me comes out, and if you just watch the movie, there's nothing on it. Then if you look at the missing pieces, then he has that part where he blows a kiss to her off screen. But I don't get any sense from earlier Twin Peaks material, the original show, or Fire Walk With Me, that they were super close or a team. It's still not even sure she's real. The best thing you would have for evidence is My Life, My Tapes, which I kind of feel flies in the face of this idea that they were this hell of a team, if you consider My Life, My Tapes to be canon, the true story of Dale Cooper. Because although they had a pretty good relationship, they, maybe would they, won't they kind of romantic chemistry, they didn't seem especially close. It wasn't his number one teammate. In fact, there were other people in the FBI he seemed to have more of a working relationship with. And then obviously later on with Wyndham Earle had a partnership. That's probably the other one I would say I think of a team. Although that was a hell of a team in a different kind of hell. That was the bad kind of hell of a team. But I kind of find it a bit of a stretch to say that Diane and Cooper are this big team. And the reason why I'm reading all into this whole thing is that if that was the intent of The Return, to establish that these two were this great team together, I don't think it gave me enough to convince me. It gave me Tulpa Diane for almost all the show. I don't really know the real Diane. And all we get of, real Diane, quote unquote, if it even is real Diane, is 17 and 18 for a little bit. I don't know where she's been. Like, has she been has the Tulpa been on Earth for 25 years, roughly, since the sexual assault? Or when did the Tulpas show up? Was that something Mr. C set up later? Maybe there's an in-universe answer, but I don't even know where Diane's been. Was her soul inside Naito's body? Or was she somewhere else and Naito just was like a portal? I don't know what Diane is.
I think that a lot of the legwork that has to be done with Diane in the respects of hell of a team, I can see the logic behind it. I can see where people can come to the conclusion of it. I think that a lot of it, though, is a very emotional reading and something that inspires that sort of like pocket of creativity that is left behind. Cooper is someone who's constantly confiding with Diane. It's an iconic line, but it's also the fact that he goes into it not only in the professional manner of reporting his instances and maybe going into deeper details of like what he's eating and what's his environment around him, like physically, that I don't really think is that important.
Right.
But it's also the moments where he's sitting inside of a bar where he's relaying his affections and his like deep thoughts and feelings that on the books would just be like a weird day in the office if Diana's just like, okay.
See, but that's the thing is he tells everyone those kind of things. He'll talk about his love for trees to people he just met.
He does talk about his love for trees for what he just met, but I feel that Kyle MacLachlan in his performance does give way that there is a certain quality that someone can read that is
Yeah.
fueled by this ongoing relation of someone that we see
so
off the screen.
One-sided for what we're given.
It is very one-sided.
And it's implied.
Hence why. It's implied. And that's where I can see, like, if there was, like, a big fan fiction stage towards Twin Peaks, I don't know if there is. I can see a lot of stories that sort of, like, delve into, like, who is Diane?
That's something to definitely bridge.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. So to say that that is what David Lynch is reading from it, I'm not saying it's an impossibility. It's just that it is structurally... it doesn't have a solid enough foundation.
Just kind of off what you're talking about, since we haven't looked at the final dossier yet, it's been a hot minute since I've read it. Do you want the final dossier to get into Diane? Would you like that? I mean, I know that you typically go in not wanting a lot of things specifically, but would that be something you'd be drawn to or not?
I'd love the fact that, like, I would just open up the final dossier and it's just, like, totally different from all other things. Like, top 10 reasons why Diane is pretty sick by David Lynch.
No, I'm just saying, like, would you like that to be a character that we get more of a history of or explore more in the final dossier or not?
I wouldn't mind it. Like, it's one of those cases where I don't mind the exploration. I think that I would enjoy the exploration, but it's not something I'm clamoring for. But then again, I'm not really clamoring for much. It's one of those cases where what is the final dossier? What is the final notes to leave behind? And how is it left behind, judging from the fact that where we left our dear Agent Cooper? Is it just this quote-unquote dream reality, what have you, just has no Cooper inside of it?
I will not obviously spoil anything. I'm interested to revisit it. I want to see how my feelings are adjusted to the book, because when I last read it, I went in already confused and disappointed by the return, unsure how I felt about Secret History. So I don't remember a lot of my first impressions on Final Dossier. They were kind of muddled by other things that it wasn't giving it a fair shake.
I'm kind of half hoping that the Final Dossier, like, this is just one giant troll you have led to.
Yep.
And at the very end of this podcast, and it's just a notebook. Like one of those, like, notebooks with the fancy titles. Like, there's nothing afterwards. It's just completely blank.
I'm not going to spoil anything.
So, Professor, how did you feel about the Final Dossier?
Okay.
I have strangled Kalil with my bare hands.
This version of the professor figured it out too quick. I need to make sure the clone does not figure it out before too late. Okay. So anyway, this whole thinking about Diane, it got my brain a whirring on things that aren't necessarily in the special features, but are relevant to the Diane conversation.
Yeah.
So to kind of just take this a more serious direction all of a sudden, I was thinking of the stuff with Diane in part 18, where there's that uncomfortable moment when they reach that hotel or motel and we see that double at the night where she sees another version of herself from the car. And then they go in and there's the most uncomfortable sex scene I've ever seen, probably. I haven't watched enough Cronenberg to beat that yet. We'll get there eventually, I'm sure. But it's very uncomfortable in a very human way. And I'm kind of thinking about my own headcanon, because again, I don't know how to prove anything with The Return. But I feel like the reason why it turns dark is because of trauma. That this is meant to be the real Diane with her memories and everything, but that's going to include the memories of the past, maybe even the memories of Tulpa Diane as well. Not sure on that last part. But what I think happened is that even though she cared about Dale Cooper and cared about him as a person, when she sees him and thinks about the idea of them having sex, it's going to reawaken these feelings of traumatic experience of the last time they were intimate, where he violated her trust and was the aggressor and hurt her in unspeakable ways. And I'm guessing that's the event that led to the Tulpa. I'm guessing that he did that to create the pain and suffering that was somehow able to make the Tulpa or something. But I think that the reason it turned dark and the reason she saw a version of herself is that idea that the trauma lingers, that you can't just like forget about that stuff and move past it completely. It follows you. And there wasn't healing that was done for this. So if we take the season 2 idea that fear and love open the door, and I think there's a lot of fear and love, even in The Return, to say that that's already a theme without that sort of phrasing. I think that a door may have been opened in part 18, but as someone who reads part 18 is pretty horrifying, I think that the fear opened the door, not the love. And Cooper was so procedural about everything that I think he might have lost touch with that. He's also been in the Red Room for 25 years. I don't even know if this man can love anymore. Like, I know we all like to say he's Cooper, and he seemed to have a pretty good interaction with Dougie's family, but does he really feel it? Does he really understand it or know it? I don't know what Dale Cooper's mindset is 25 years later, much less Diane's. I don't even know who Diane is and where her mind has been 25 years while the Tulpa walked the earth. There's all these questions that could be raised. But I'm just thinking that no matter how I dice it, the way it feels to me, it feels like this is kind of the fear leading into part 18. And the message that I get out of it is this sort of trauma that is there for Diane.
No, I think that genuinely it's very solid for, especially in the respects of like what opens the Red Room. And I don't really know what to say that would try to challenge or counter it. It's not something that I think that I'm fully like throwing my hat in and saying, yes, that sounds amazing, I'm jumping on the ship. No, but I do genuinely feel that it is a both horrifying yet wonderful, mysterious take.
And we're going to be talking about the part 18 and the ending very soon. But this also with Diane made me think of that, where depending on how you read events, you could look at it that Dale Cooper led two of the most hurt women in all of Twin Peaks, two of them that have been horribly hurt by the people they care about and trust most. He led them both back to their place of suffering and trauma.
Yes.
I don't know if this is going to catch up on the podcast, but a dog just started loudly barking as soon as I said that. That's the black dog running at night, just to clarify. That's the black dog running at night.
We found it, folks!
Okay, thank you for the comic relief.
Wait, or did they find us?
I don't know, but thank you for the comic relief. Black dog runs at night. You're ominous, but you also levitied the mood a little. Levitied? Is that a word? This is an unedited podcast, so I'm not going to worry about it. With this, though, it's just that feeling of like, yeah, Laura was obviously brought back to her household, which is this center of pain, and Diane was brought into the bedroom with Cooper, which is a place of pain. And it's pretty easy for me to look at this as misguided efforts on Cooper's part. And I think that's still, when I see online comments, that's a pretty common sentiment, is this feeling that Cooper, with this sort of white knight syndrome, made this horrible mistake. And that I think that's consistent with My Life, My Tapes, is that maybe that element of him being lured in to try to play the hero in these sort of situations, especially with women. And it can lead to grave mistakes and grave errors.
Yes.
There is something I think you can read into when Lynch is talking with Cheryl Lee, the actress for Laurel
Palmer.
He says that as she's looking at the house, something like changes and, quote, all the stuff comes back. And that's presumably right before she starts screaming. And I think that this is, a lot of people's maybe belief and opinion and read is that she does suddenly remember a bunch of things, that Carrie Page, while looking at the house, all the memories of Laura Palmer come flooding back. But this does get it in, not in writing, but in straight from the horse's mouth. The horse is David Lynch. The white horse? But the other implication this has for me is that it's unlikely, by his words, that it's intended that Carrie Page was lying about not knowing about Laura. Because it seems like if it all starts, all these memories, I'm presuming that's the stuff coming back as memories. I don't know what other stuff there's going to be coming back.
Yeah.
Mucus in her nose. I'm assuming it's the memories. So I'm assuming she really was telling the truth when she said she doesn't know who Laura is. She doesn't know about all this stuff. The mentioning of Sarah had a reaction to her, but that may not be a conscious understanding of why it had a reaction. Just something about that affected her, but she didn't remember. So that would put to rest, potentially, any sort of theories you might have about maybe she wanted her witness protection, or maybe she ran away and changed her name. She's trying to escape being Laura Palmer. If we do take the idea that it all comes flooding back, that means that she doesn't really understand or know it until that final moment. Then the scream happens. Does this in any way, shape, or form affect how you view the ending of Twin Peaks: The Return?
Max, not really. It doesn't affect me at all, for the respect that I've already felt that Carrie Page, the final page, the person that was being brought up in this moment, the notable scream played by the same actor, I think that it all fits just fine. I think that bringing this character to basically their deathbed and finding out about that and then screaming an abhorrent horror is just fitting enough for the scene, and I think it does well with it. I think it does very well with it.
But don't worry, you don't get any answers about who the man was that was dead in her place. That there's no acknowledgement. Like David Lynch says that, like, yeah, Cooper, you're like looking at that. I don't think he said Cooper. I think he said Kalil. But yeah, you're looking at the guy on the chair who's dead, and you're looking at the white horse. And those are the two main things that strike you. But no elaboration on who the dead man is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably one of the weirdest things in The Return to like process why there's a dead man sitting in the chair. It raises so many questions.
Laura Palmer.
In every world, in every timeline.
Who knows? What was written on the last page?
Oh, the Carrie page? The
Carrie page.
See, and that's where, like, is Carrie page the last page?
If Carrie page is last page, metaphorically, or whatever, it is something where I can believe it, but also there is, I think, that lingering mystery.
Hey, that's what season 4 is about, right? The last page. Please don't happen, season 4. Please don't happen.
Unless David Lynch wants it, in which I think he's going to have a fun time. I will destroy all art for people's joy.
One character that, if there ever was to be a season 4, would probably need to be explored further, presumably if it's even set in the town of Twin Peaks. Sarah Palmer. Maybe more would be said about Sarah Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most interesting characters in The Return. And we talked before about how Grace Zabriskie and David Lynch had this really interesting back and forth. There is some stuff in here with Grace Zabriskie doing the grocery store scene.
Yes.
And that was fun to watch happen. But the main thing that struck to my mind wasn't even in the behind the scenes. It was more, again, what it led me to think about, which is, again, one of my favorite things about the special features is stuff it makes you think about, kind of just seeing it from a different angle. Like, just seeing the footage from a different angle, you maybe think about the lines a different way than you used to. And things that maybe I just didn't quite have a way to articulate, I now have a way of more of articulating.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems way more obvious to me looking at the scene kind of from a different angle that when Sarah Palmer's talking to the cashier, and the cashier's talking about this turkey jerky stuff, then Sarah Palmer says, "Were you here when they first came?" The implication to the cashier would be when they first came and brought the turkey jerky. But when you step aside and you're just like looking at the lines and like thinking about it, they're in a convenience store, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it totally tracks that she's actually talking about the woodsman, right? When the woodsman first came, were you here? Which already clues us off that Sarah Palmer's not quite in a normal sense of mind.
Yeah.
There's something on another plane of thought happening right now, tapping into that spiritual realm. And then she says, men are coming. Again, this would tie in pretty strongly to the idea of the woodsman. What I think is most interesting to hear from Sarah Palmer is that she is warning in tone. Like she is warning the cashier, like, I'm trying to tell you something happened to me. Like she's almost saying, watch out to this cashier. And I don't think it's because the cashier is secretly a really important character. I don't think the warning is specific to the cashier. But I think it speaks against maybe my fears that I have worried in the past that the return is kind of vilifying or demonizing Sarah Palmer by making her all evil, making her worse than Leland and Bob because she has Judy in her, presumably. And I can understand, that concern. And that's been my concern because you took this character who's this victim of grief and suffering, and you've given her potentially the frogmoth stuff, depending on your interpretation. You've given her potentially Judy, depending on your interpretation. You've had her rip off her face and darkness is within, and she rips someone's face off. Like almost all negative connotations of the violent imagery in her house. But then when you get to the sense of, okay, she actually is potentially warning this cashier, and there's a sort of desperation in her voice. When she talks to Hawk at the door, she might be also trying to help and protect Hawk by don't come in. Like she doesn't want people to come in because she could hurt them. So although it's not healthy for her, maybe she's withdrawing away to try to save people from being hurt. And at the bar, she is not looking for a victim. That guy came to her and she told him to back off. So if I look at Sarah Palmer, I don't even see her as trying to hurt people. She doesn't seem like a predator the way that Leland was like going after people to kill them. She just seems like someone who's really suffering.
I think that she's really suffering, and she's not letting anyone in or near because she knows what that suffering could potentially do to those around her, which, if we are to take mental health as both a literal thing as well as a metaphysical thing inside of the text itself, she's also damning herself as well, because without any resources or anything like that, she is slowly festering away amongst this. You did like, but I also do think that this sort of like reservation is also very Frankenstein's monster-esque. The monster that at the end of the day is, or at the very least through the novel, is trying to find a place far, far, far away to basically travel to get away from it all and seclude himself, as though he has not chosen the life for himself, and that was basically crafted thanks to like another being, in this case Dr. Frankenstein. It is still something he, at the end of the day, has to live with.
You are winning me over more and more with the argument about the comparison, because at first I was kind of adverse to it, but the more I hear you, the more I'm listening to you, and the more I'm thinking about it, because there is a really tragic element, if we think about it from that lens you're kind of describing, where she's learned over the years that the more she's around people and lets them in, the more they are hurt and the more she is hurt. And that's ultimately the lesson that the creature ends up learning, is that he is an aberration, that when other people are near him, they run in terror, they get hurt, they get killed, but then also they attack him. And obviously I'm not saying that people are, bringing torches to Sarah Palmer's house, but more so that she might have learned very, very tragically that if she gets close to people, it only leads to pain for herself and for them. So instead she isolates, which if Judy is within her, that creates this renewable energy source of Garmonbozia, this infinite loop. You want to think about that infinite loop that Jeffries put in the tea kettle.
Yes.
That upside down spin a Rudy date. Potentially there's an infinite suffering that was happening there.
Potentially. It's also how you read, say, for example, The Breaking Point, where she stabs Laura Palmer's portrait.
And what exactly is she trying to do with that emotion? Is it Judy, or is it Sarah doing it, or is it both? And is it to hurt Laura, or is it to express her sadness? What is going on there? You can read into it many different ways, but it is very tragic and scary in its own ways, no matter how you read it. Also worth questioning is when she says something happened to me, what is the something that Sarah Palmer's thinking about when she's yelling in the grocery store? Is it Laura Palmer's death? Is it Leland drugging her, being Bob, and what he did to Laura and him dying? Is this something potentially drawing back to her childhood, her early teen years, when she was asleep in a vulnerable spot and the frog moth crawled in her mouth? What is the thing that happened to her? What's the something? Or is it whenever Judy showed up? Because, Judy could be the frog moth. Maybe that was just waiting and incubating. Was Judy already there in the original series? I think you can jump off from what the something is several different places.
You could jump off in various ends. I obviously lean to the frog moth and myself, but there's also various examples of major events inside of Twin Peaks and beyond happening off screen that we do not have much knowledge on. Gaps in instances where you just see the conclusions of it.
See, my thinking right now, and this could change in a week, right, is that I don't think Sarah Palmer in the original run was aware of the spirit within her. If it was already there, I think it was lying dormant before that point. If it was already this is also assuming that she was the frog moth situation or something like that. But I think by the time of the return, she is aware of it because she seems to actively know to go away when she starts getting really emotional. And the only time she doesn't is when it's that jerk at the bar, and she did warn him first. So it seems to me like there's this awareness that she kind of knows that this entity's in her, in a way that Leland may never have known about Bob. Or at least if Leland knew, he repressed it. He really buried it if he did ever know. Because there's that whole babe in the woods line that Bob says too. So I don't think that Sarah Palmer's a babe in the woods. I think she kind of knows, but I don't think she knew in the original series. That's just my read of the character. She just seems way more like heightened awareness and fear of her own self and what she's capable of in the return, whereas I did not get that impression before. But then again, Sarah Palmer in Fire Walk With Me and in the original show was always drugged. Whether she's drugged by Leland or people coming over and giving her things following her grief. We always see people putting things in her arm. So I'm just saying, even then, we don't even know Sarah Palmer's normal mental state. The last thing we saw Sarah Palmer in season 2 was I'm with Dale Cooper in the Black Lodge.
Which is not exactly a great place to be.
No, top 10 signs someone's not doing well. Number 1, I'm with Dale Cooper in the Black Lodge.
We mentioned before, maybe psychiatric practices grew in these past, 25 years since I had Twin Peaks.
Got rid of Jacoby.
I mean,
He's
they
just
got
Alex
rid of
Jones
Jacoby,
now.
But who replaced Jacoby? And was
Right.
it in time for Sarah Palmer?
This
when
is
the
a whole
drugs wore
essay.
down inside
Yeah.
of Leland.
And I want to put the most massive pin in that, because I don't think it's something we're going to address now. Maybe we go into it in the final curtain call. Maybe it's something that we have to wrestle with for a long time. I want to talk about it at some point, but I think there are so many avenues to explore about the kind of things we're talking about, because what we're really getting at, I think, what we're really kind of touching the surface on is how broken is the society of Twin Peaks. And not just Twin Peaks, the town, but the world of Twin Peaks, which in the return is obviously broadened to Las Vegas, to South Dakota, to New York, to other places as well. But specifically, especially Twin Peaks, the town, I would say, because it's the place we see the most of. Getting rid of Jacoby, good. He was definitely not the best qualified, but was there a support system put in place instead? One of the things my brain has been working on a lot, and I want to think about it and process it more before I end up kind of putting it out there, probably on YouTube in some format, is thinking about the law enforcement. We've talked about the Bookhouse Boys and how ineffective they are.
Multiple times.
Even when we get to the return, I look at Bobby's character, and my interpretation, because it's never, I don't think 100% stated, I'm assuming he became a cop because he wanted to protect people and help people like Laura and like himself when he was a kid, helping these kids who are going through these tough times that they weren't helped before. I think Bobby is such an interesting character because it seems like when he called everyone out at the funeral for Laura, he said everyone, including himself, he's complicit in it too, calling out everyone for letting this happen. You're all hypocrites. You knew Laura's suffering and you didn't do anything. I think Bobby, in his own way, was trying to find something he could do. How could he help people like Laura? And he chose law enforcement. And I look at it, and it's, I think, a really looming question. Was he able to help anyone like Laura? Because the closest analog I think we get to Laura, we don't have a lot of young people in the return.
No.
Is probably his own daughter, Becky, or her boyfriend, Steven. And if we look at the last scene we get of those two, it seems to end in tragedy for Steven. And for Becky, it's a question of where does she go from this? So it's a question of, can law enforcement fix these problems? Can the psychologists fix these problems? What outlet is there and what services can their society provide?
Just as a reminder, what was Becky's last scene? Because I know that Becky's
She did marry Steven, so it's Burnett. I keep saying boyfriend, but they are husband.
They are husband. So
I always forget.
What was her last scene? Because I remember her husband's last scene. Yes, what was her last scene? I believe it was them
together.
No, it was like him and the person he was seeing.
Oh, you're right.
Yes.
Was it her with the gun?
No, it was him with the gun.
No,
he had a gun on his own person. You're right.
I was thinking, I forgot Gersten's even part of this.
Gersten, very important in Twin Peaks character, part of the huge Hayward timeline.
You're right. The one Hayward who we really get.
The one Hayward that crawled out of the hole in the middle of Twin Peaks
one of them,
I still exist.
One of them Skyped from the hole of Twin Peaks. Anyway. So, yeah, you're right. Was it the diner scene?
I think it was the diner.
Huh. I mean, she had support from her family. And that's interesting, too, if we look at the angle that, as a cop, he wasn't really able to stop it. Like, there's all these Chinese drugs flowing in, and it's this terrible situation. Drugs seem to be getting worse. It's having this horrible effect on people. You go outside, you see the effect on these people with, the zombie child in the car. Things in Twin Peaks, the state of Twin Peaks is rotten, Hamlet, etc. But the number one thing he could do to help someone like Laura is be a good dad.
And from what we see from the last scene, it seems that at the very least, Becky might be set onto a better path, potentially. But also,
you kind of just won me over a lot, actually, because that's actually really beautiful. Because you think about what helped Bobby was, in part, his father, right? Yeah. It wasn't the law enforcement, it wasn't Jacoby, it wasn't any social institution.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. There's something to explore.
There's something fun to explore right there, but I also want to put forward as a little bit of rebuttal is the flaw.
Now that you just inspired me.
I inspired you. It's a flaw that you and I spoke off podcast, and I want to make sure that I'm honest on podcast, is the fact that we don't see a lot from the activities. What good he's able to do is never showcased. It is only what bad is in the environment.
We can only go by what we see.
We can only go by what we see.
And I would argue that for the artistic work, if it was important, we should be shown it. I would argue that that's how you understand the world of a piece of media. So I would say that the world of Twin Peaks as presented, if there is a theme, if there are points to be made, we should be shown those materials. So I think if we're looking at the narrative and theming of Bobby's story, you have to go with what we see. And I think the idea that the last scene he has with Becky that might be a hopeful scene is when he just simply is prioritizing his daughter and being a father for her. I think there's some poetry to that. Bobby is one of the most successful characters throughout all Twin Peaks.
You did the veranda's here.
The veranda still might not be here. That's loading currently. So yeah, that's all I got in my notes. That's it. I had something else, but I'm saving it for later.
Oh.
I decided to save it for the curtain call.
This is the most wonderful and strange questions of the week.
Oh yeah, actually, hold on a second. Hold on.
There's something there.
Hold on. No,
don't
hold on.
He's looking for soundboard. Go!
The whoosh counter. You thought it was done.
Yeah.
But it's living again.
This is not a question of the week. This is
the
a whoosh.
The whoosh is dead, and yet it lives. Because when I put the subtitles on for the Behind the Curtain special feature, although I was taking notes during it and I might have missed it, I caught at least one whoosh. There was a moment when Kyle MacLachlan was being... I think it was like during the box scene, there was a fan blowing on him, and it just said whooshing. So we got one more whoosh for a grand total, like, was it 100 exactly last time? I think we're 101 now or something.
101.
No, it was like 120. It was a lot.
121, whatever it is.
We got a lot of
whooshes.
whooshes.
You have taken this, like, dirty rag, and you are squeezing it for everything it's worth.
Also, I got one more thing. The Mark Frost counter.
That was a loud clap.
He's very loved. So I counted at least 2 sightings of Mark Frost. There's probably more, but I counted at least 2.
You did. How proud are you?
I'm pretty proud. I mean, again, I was taking notes during it, so and I wasn't always looking in the background at who was all there, but there were at least a couple times where I saw Mark Frost on the set, and I wanted to highlight that because that was the thing I wasn't sure about. How often was he involved? Still not very consistent of a presence on set of The Return, and I think that's notable because with the writing, we do get moments where David Lynch is changing lines or adding or removing things still on the fly. It doesn't seem like it's that often. It doesn't seem like it's totally improv like, Inland Empire. But it definitely did have some moments where a line might be changed or a way something was done had been changed. I would assume that any of those changes weren't from Mark Frost.
I like to think that every other instance, he's just not on camera. Maybe he's in the break room grabbing a donut. Maybe he's actually behind the camera and wielding it. Maybe he's just like dodging it, just like some sort of mythical Bigfoot, just like hiding behind people.
My takeaway is that David Lynch as the director, he's the one directing, obviously. And Mark Frost, given credit as a writer, he probably was more involved in the script originally. So he didn't necessarily need to be on the set the whole time. I just think that that's notable when you're thinking about Twin Peaks: The Return being made, that it was David Lynch's baby a lot of the time on the set. Mark Frost had kind of done his job already at that point and was still involved in the process and maybe being briefed on things, but he wasn't as hands-on during this situation. At least what we saw after 13 hours of watching this behind the scenes. But also importantly... Okay, that's actually a sad sound. What's a better sound?
What do you know? Sad sound is sad.
Okay, laughter seems kind of condescending. What else do we got over here? Okay, I like the scary one. So, more importantly, or just as importantly, is the Sabrina Sutherland counter. The Sabrina Sutherland counter. Producer Sabrina Sutherland.
Why are you coming up with these counters and items? Like, why is all of this like radio event time?
Actually, I don't even have a number. I didn't even write down the number. I just want to do the sound effect. So anyway,
I found them.
My convoluted way of saying this is that although Mark Frost isn't a constant presence on the set, Sabrina Sutherland's actually there quite often. She also cameos as one of the casino employees in there. She had previously, I think, cameoed as one of the Great Northern employees. So she's had double roles. If you want to headcanon the same character 25 years later, you can do that with different names or something.
The Return one is a tulpa.
Sure, you could do it that way if you want. But she's pretty consistently in the background alongside cinematographer Peter Deming, who's, I don't know if you, I know again.
Is Peter Deming a horrifying individual?
Well, actually, he can be, because he has collaborated with Sam Raimi and Wes Craven before, a lot. And also, he did Cabin in the Woods for cinematography. And then he worked on The Menu last year, which has not only horror, but like thriller elements. So he a lot of times does work on elements that have like violence or kind of scary, spooky stuff going on. And previously, he had worked with David Lynch on Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive, two of the spookier David Lynch films.
You really like that trombone. It's just the trombone is forever in my head associated with you.
And again, Peter Deming, who again is consistently on the set, one of the more consistent people. I mean, again, cinematography obviously has to be. He was nominated for Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Cinematography for The Return.
I'm priming myself to just pull my headphone cord and draw.
I'm realizing now as I'm saying all of this, I realize now, and you can make fun of me all you want, Professor, for this. I'm not going to hit any buttons, don't worry.
Thank you.
I just realizing now, I decided to make an announcement that the cinematographer, the guy who does the camera stuff, and the producer, the person who runs the set, would you believe they're both on the set a lot? That's my big takeaway. After watching 8 hours of special features, that's the note I'm ending on. That the guy who does the camera and the person who does the set, they're both just there a lot. Isn't that weird? Would you know? Guess what? David Lynch, the director, is also there a lot. Wow, would you believe it?
Wow.
And of all the actors, Kyle MacLachlan was there a lot too.
Kyle MacLachlan?
I can't even believe it.
And believe it or not, this is a special feature on a Blu-ray. And we live in a house. And the world is scary.
It's in our house now, folks. So anyway, I got a wonderful and strange question of the week for you.
We made it, didn't we?
Yeah, something to save me from this hole I've dug myself. If an ant... Okay.
If an ant...
Shush. I know, I know how you feel about Dumbland. I'm not going to bring ants into this. So, you are a big fan of animation.
Yeah.
If an animated Twin Peaks series was announced...
Okay.
And you were tasked with being some kind of creative lead or, giving ideas for it, okay?
The idea guy?
Yeah, either you could be the director if you want, or you could just be like a producer. You're given ideas. What would you want to do with the Twin Peaks animated series? It's going to happen. You can't stop it from happening, even if you disagree with the idea. There's going to be one. What would you do with it? Would you adapt like previous material? Would you have an original screenplay? What are you thinking you would, like, is it aimed for kids? Is it aimed for adults? What would you do with it?
Honestly, I would love maybe even like to Riverdale extents, explore the high school with Becky and just like
set it during the return times or a little before?
A little bit before, a little bit after, or maybe even a little bit during, like
sure,
kind of like cross in these lives, if you will, just because genuinely speaking, there seems to be a lot more youth inside of Twin Peaks that are being highlighted, but we never get a chance to explore. That I personally would love to have something that's just a day-to-day situation focusing on the younger people.
So would you make it more soap opera relationship entanglements like the original, or would you keep it kind of like minimalist and sort of dry like the return? Like what kind of tone would you set?
I think I would try to more so go a little bit into classic Twin Peaks, but again, Riverdale was my example, but sort of like twisted inside of darker, but also like play.
The moment you say Riverdale, you are allowing for stuff to get weird still.
Cult rockets, man. Cult rockets.
What kind of art style are you thinking? Is it going to look like, a lot of adult animation in like the West where it kind of has like, I don't know what you call it, like that art style you see for things like Archer? Is it going to be like realistic, or is it going to be...
If anyone has seen the Spectacular Spider-Man, the much more sort of like rounded features off of that, but then sort of like maybe play with a little bit of a semi-darker color scheme. I still think that it should be aimed at like an older audience, but I do kind of like enjoy that mix between comic book and almost Kim Possible shaping that gets involved with that.
Is Freddy going to show up with superpowers with his glove at certain points and like punch out the school bullies?
I think Freddie was from the UK during the time. So
he's foreign exchange adult.
Foreign exchange green glove man.
He could show up and teach UK British. They have a class, a foreign language class, but it's just for learning British.
Actually, you know what? Like, I know this sounds weird and insane, but let's just say, for example, like Benjamin Horne like drops a lot of things and Dick Tremaine doesn't have much inspirations for himself. What about like having a home economics teacher or something like that as like Dick Tremaine?
He would try so hard but like, if it's 25 years later, would he have burned out, or is he still like Dick Tremaine? Like,
I think it's Dick Tremaine that has gotten multiple write-ups and multiple like calls and concerns from parents and staff members that like he should stop smoking in class while teaching, but they don't have anyone to replace him, so they still keep him around.
Oh man, do you think he's ever seen Wall-E, his probable son?
Oh, I thought you meant Wall-E, the Disney movie.
No. I meant Wally Brando. Maybe. Michael Cera. No.
Right, that's a
Has
son.
he ever seen Wall-E? Okay, no. Both questions. Has he ever seen Disney's Wall-E? And then has he ever seen Wally Brando, who's probably his own biological son?
I think that, like, he has a restraining order against Wall-E when he was, like...
He has it against Wall-E?
Yeah.
Okay.
He does not want to be anywhere near Wall-E whatsoever. He won't stay far away. He basically said, well, Andy, I suppose I concede at this moment in notion. And after that, he put it into ink and now is pursuing every single other person.
I mean, after his experience as a little Nicky, do you think like that made him more or less likely to want to teach children?
I think it makes it more humorous for him to teach children more than anything, whether he wants to or not.
Are we going to learn about adult Nicholas in your animated series?
Big 25 years
was it
later,
large Nicholas?
Not.
I think large Nicholas is the term we settled on last time.
I mean, maybe if he has a kid or something like that. But
he could.
The hard thing is, it's 25 years later. This will be a 30-something-year-old man.
That's how this works, though, is it's his kid, and he goes to the home ec class, so he's like... Nicholas Jr. And he finds out his last name and horror starts going in. And it's like this kid's actually the devil this time. It's Riverdale. Why can't the Antichrist be in home ec?
Why can't the Antichrist be in home ec? I need that on a t-shirt.
Well, as you get that on a cheese shirt, which is kind of what I thought you said at first, we're going to go ahead and adjourn this episode, call a recess, and we'll see you in about a week. Or if you're listening to this from the future, we'll see you whenever you decide to tolerate us again and hit the play button. Next time on the Twin Peaks Wonderful Strange Logcast, we're going to be talking about the remaining special features for the return on the Z-Day.
You had the ball!
It's an unedited podcast on the Z-Day collection. It's everything else. So it's not a specific disc. It's just anything that's not impressions or behind the red curtain. Behind the curtain. It's not red. It's any color you want it to be. It's like 5 hours worth of stuff. Content just to awkwardly end it with like no ending. Just let it die.
Just letting it, honestly, like, I think that what should happen is that if we don't think of something immediately, if it's a truly unedited podcast, we should just like sit here for a bit and just sort of
inflate
way back,
the time.
Listen to our previous ones, and then somehow incorporate that into the listening, or it's just us being silent for like 5 minutes, so you're like,
So I kind of like about this idea is that the last episode we did in like the 5 hour special features about 2 hours or so, right? So this one, they should think it's probably gonna be a little longer because it's 8 hours of special features. So we should just talk for about, I don't know, at least like 40 more minutes. Just to kind of, because I mean, right now, unedited, which this is an unedited podcast, it is currently whatever time it is you're seeing because it's unedited.
Yeah,
so we should extend that.
I have to get up in about 8.5 hours. And I haven't eaten.
Yeah, well,
I had a energy drink V8.
How was that?
At the start of this, it was actually pretty good.
Not sponsored.
It's basically sparkly tea. It's green and black tea, and it's actually pretty good. But that's not the point right now, Kalil. For whatever bit you're trying to get forward, I need to go to bed.
Why can't we just, as two friends, have a conversation without it being a bit?
I've just described the exact reason. It was for me to go to sleep.
Well, I mean, you're going to be replaced by the clone anyway.
What clone? Do you have some technology inside this apartment that's going to deal with this?
You.
You keep saying that. I can say something. I'm president of the United Bates. It's not the States. It's the new country. Doesn't make the country exist, Kalil. It doesn't make the United Bates.
What's the minimum you have to do to prove your country exists?
Apparently.
Like, who certifies that the UN at this point? Like, who decides what's a country?
Honestly, I
Because
think
the Vatican,
unedited podcast.
unedited podcast,
The Vatican does something, but no, I think that like all land has been claimed at this point.
make some new land.
Make some new.
Take all of the trash that's in the coral reef and form a land mass out of it. Glue it together with globs of whatever's coming out of Dougie's mouth.
Blah.